Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. This time we're tackling a giant, Ronald Reagan, through his own words in An American Life.
Should be fascinating. His story touches on so many pivotal moments: Hollywood, the Cold War, the American presidency.
It's incredible, really, how much ground one man's story can cover. And we've got a lot to unpack, so let's jump right in. You've been digging into Reagan's early years, right? Small-town Illinois, Dixon to be exact.
Yeah, it's classic Americana. Reagan paints this vivid picture of his childhood, a small town, strong work ethic, those Midwestern values. He really emphasizes that upbringing as formative.
You can definitely see those roots throughout his life. And speaking of formative experiences, that story about his eyesight. He couldn't see clearly until he got glasses as a teenager. It makes you wonder, how much did that shape his worldview, literally seeing the world in a whole new way?
Right. He even says, "I discovered a world I didn't know existed before." Who knows what kind of path his life might have taken without that pivotal moment.
We might not be talking about President Reagan if his vision had stayed blurry. But, blurry to bright lights from small-town Illinois to Hollywood, rubbing shoulders with the likes of Errol Flynn. Talk about a journey.
It's an incredible transition, right? And we see that leadership spark even back then. He goes from being skeptical of the Screen Actors Guild to fighting for actors' rights.
And don't forget that heartwarming story about his father. After his dad has a heart attack, Reagan helps him regain purpose by giving him a job managing fan mail at the studio. Talk about family values in action.
It really underscores that sense of loyalty that Reagan carried with him throughout his life. But even with this Hollywood success, a shift was happening. Politically, Reagan was moving from Democrat to conservative Republican. He talks about becoming disillusioned with big government. And this is where things start to get really interesting.
Okay, get this. The speech that launched his political career, the one everyone was urging him to give, he almost skipped it. Thought it was some kind of setup. Can you imagine if he'd stayed home that night? History might have taken a very different turn.
Talk about a sliding doors moment.
Yeah.
But it kind of fits that classic narrative of the reluctant hero, right? The man who answers the call to serve, even when he's hesitant.
It's the stuff of legends. But before we get to Reagan on the national stage, we've got to talk about his time as governor of California. Because that's where he puts his ideas into practice, right? And the results are pretty telling.
Absolutely. It's like a testing ground for his conservative policies. 2 terms, dealing with real-world issues like campus unrest, a budget crisis. And get this, he actually ends up with a surplus.
A surplus. Remember those? It seems like a lifetime ago.
Right. It's a remarkable feat, especially considering the economic turmoil of the time. But you know what really stands out from this part of the book? Reagan's approach to leadership. He talks about wanting to win over his opponents, finding common ground instead of playing dirty.
Wait, are you telling me the guy who called the Soviet Union the evil empire was all about finding common ground?
It might seem surprising, but that was Reagan. He even charmed Tip O'Neill, the Democratic Speaker of the House, of all people.
Now that's impressive. Tip O'Neill was as tough as they come. How on earth did Reagan manage that?
Charisma, no doubt. But also political strategy. He knew that getting things done meant building consensus, even with your opponents. It's a lesson that seems more relevant than ever these days.
No kidding. You don't see that kind of crock-the-aisle collaboration much anymore. But okay, let's move on to the main event. Reagan in the White House. We're talking surviving an assassination attempt, facing down the Soviets during the Cold War. That's a whole other level of pressure.
It's true, and you can feel the weight of those years in his writing. But you know what's remarkable? His resilience. He talks about the assassination attempt with this almost casual humor, like it was just another Tuesday.
He did have a way of making people feel at ease, didn't he? Even after being shot, he kept his sense of humor. That must have been reassuring for a nation on edge.
Absolutely. And then there's his unwavering commitment to American strength, especially against the Soviets.
He called them the evil empire. No mincing words there.
Exactly. He believed in American exceptionalism and wasn't afraid to stand up for it.
But he also understood the importance of diplomacy, right? His relationship with Gorbachev was huge.
Huge. It was that interesting balance, strength, and diplomacy that defined his approach to foreign policy. He believed in negotiating from a position of power, but also keeping those lines of communication open.
And look, it worked. The end of the Cold War, you can't talk about that without acknowledging Reagan's role. But he wasn't just shaping foreign policy. What about Reaganomics? Tax cuts, deregulation, that whole push for free market principles.
Right, a real shift in economic thinking. And to this day, people debate the impact of those policies. Did they usher in an era of prosperity or contribute to income inequality?
It's a question that still resonates. But there's no denying the lasting impact of Reaganomics on the country. But one thing Reagan always emphasized was individual responsibility, right?
Absolutely. The American dream, the idea that anyone can succeed through hard work and determination, that was a core part of his message.
A message that still resonates with a lot of people today. But of course, not everyone starts from the same place, and systemic issues can make that pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality feel out of reach for some.
Right. It's a complex issue with no easy answers. And that's something we see throughout Reagan's legacy, this mix of triumph and challenge, success and controversy, like the Iran-Contra affair, for example. A major scandal, no doubt, but you've got to admire his willingness to take responsibility.
How many politicians today would do that? It speaks volumes about his character, right?
It does. That sense of accountability feels almost like a relic of a bygone era. But, for all the talk about policy and politics, one of the most compelling aspects of an American life is the glimpse it gives you into Reagan, the man.
You get a sense of the person behind the presidency. His love for Nancy, those quiet moments on his ranch. It's a good reminder that even presidents are human.
Exactly, with their own hopes, fears, and passions. And those human moments make his story that much more relatable, even if you don't agree with his politics. It reminds us that history is made by real people, not just names and textbooks. And speaking of those human moments, that final image Reagan leaves us with looking back at the White House from Air Force One, realizing it wasn't just a little shack anymore, it was home. Powerful stuff.
It really gets you thinking about the personal toll of leadership, the weight of the world on your shoulders, the sacrifices made along the way, and then having to say goodbye to it all.
It makes you wonder what goes through a president's mind during that final flight. What are they reflecting on? What regrets or triumphs are they carrying with them?
It's a side of leadership we don't often get to see. And, it makes me think about Reagan's faith. Because that's a theme that comes through pretty strongly in his writing.
It does. You get a sense that his faith was really a guiding force for him, both personally and professionally.
Absolutely. He saw America as this, shining city on a hill, a beacon of hope and freedom. That kind of belief, that optimism, it's pretty powerful stuff.
It's hard not to feel inspired by it, even all these years later. So for our listener, what's the key takeaway from Reagan's story? What's that one big idea they should walk away with?
That's a good question. I think at its core, it's about the power of belief. Believing in yourself, your country, the possibility of a better tomorrow. Even when things were tough, Reagan never lost sight of that. And that's a message that resonates no matter what your political leanings are. He just had that ability to connect with people, inspire them to believe in something bigger than themselves.
He did. It makes you wonder, what would Reagan make of America today in 2024? What issues would he be championing if he were here?
Oh, that's a fascinating question. Knowing his core values, I'd have to imagine limited government would still be a big one for him. Individual freedom, a strong national defense. Those were all really important to him.
Definitely. And economic growth, too. He'd probably be pushing for policies that promote entrepreneurship, opportunity, the kind of things he saw as essential for the American dream.
Tax cuts, deregulation, right? That emphasis on personal responsibility, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, controlling your own destiny, those ideas were central to his worldview.
But it's interesting to think about how those messages would play out in today's world, right? I mean, things have changed. We're dealing with different challenges now, income inequality, climate change, this intense political polarization.
It makes you wonder, how would he navigate those complexities?
Yeah.
How would his message be received? It's hard to say for sure. But, one thing's for certain. Ronald Reagan was a transformative figure. Love him or hate him, he left a mark on America. And his story, it still resonates today.
No doubt about it. Whether you agree with his politics or not, An American Life offers a fascinating window into a pivotal time in American history.
And with that, I think we've successfully navigated our deep dive into the life and legacy of Ronald Reagan. It's been quite a journey, but remember, this is just the starting point. There's always more to learn, more to explore.
Exactly. Don't just take our word for it. Go back to An American Life. Revisit those moments that sparked your curiosity. Dig a little deeper. Who knows what other insights you might uncover?
Maybe those insights will even spark your next deep dive. Until then, happy exploring, everyone.